Hi, everyone. Welcome to one of our final presentations here from the virtual fair. We have Sunny from the Princeton Review going to be talking all about the MCAT and the DAT. So without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Sunny.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining me today. So as Sarah mentioned, my name is Sunny Coelho. I am the Executive Director for the Princeton Review in Canada. So I thank you for joining me tonight as we wrap up the fair with a final presentation. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the standardized tests that are required for medical school and dental school, the MCAT and the DAT. And so first thing I'd like to do is make sure that you make note of my contact information that's on the slide. So my email address is sunny.coelho@review.com. If you have any questions after the session is done, I would be happy to answer them for you. Feel free to send me an email. I'll also check the chat at the end. But also, if you'd like a copy of the slides that I will be presenting tonight, feel free to send me an email and I'm happy to send you a copy of the slides. Okay, and definitely check out our social media as well. You can follow us at TPR Canada, both on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. So check us out there. Okay, so let's talk about the tests. Now I'm going to start with the MCAT. So for those of you who are interested in medical school, the MCAT, of course, is the medical college admission test. So this is the standardized test that you will need to take if you would like to attend medical school. Now, not every medical school in Canada requires the MCAT, but it's required by most. And there are many international medical schools that require it as well, including medical schools in Australia. And so the organization that administers the MCAT is an organization called the Association of American Medical Colleges, or AAMC for short. I am going to ask you to make note of the website here, aamc.org/MCAT. Very important website. It's where you go to register for the actual test. It's also where you can learn a lot more about any updates related to the MCAT, what's happening with the test, are there any changes coming up, what's happening with the administration of the test during the pandemic, all sorts of details like that. So definitely check out aamc.org as soon as you have a chance and learn a little bit more about the test through there. As I mentioned before, it's required for entry to most Canadian medical schools. There are a couple that, that don't require it, like the University of Ottawa or the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. And like I said, many international schools require it, but some don't. So you'll definitely want to do your research a little bit as to which ones actually require the MCAT. Now, one thing to know about the MCAT is the format. So the MCAT is a computer-based test. And what that means is that it feels a lot like taking a paper-based test, except that you're doing it on computer, right? So what I mean by that is when you start the first section of the MCAT, if there is a particular, say, a particular question you don't like, you can skip it. You can come back to that question later. So as long as you're within the section, you can answer the questions in any order that you like, and you can skip questions, go back to them later. And I think that's very helpful for students, as they take the test. Now, in terms of test dates, so in 2021, there were approximately 30 test dates. AMC ended up adding 1 or 2 extra test dates because a lot of the spots were filling up. I anticipate that in 2022, it will be the same. There will be around 30 test dates in Canada. And I think a good thing to keep in mind is that, a lot of the test dates do happen in the summer. So you will find that more than half of those test dates will be in June, July, August, and September for obvious reasons, right? Like students like to take the MCAT in the summer because it doesn't conflict with school. And so I think you'll find that, a lot of those test dates will take place in the summer. Now this year, in order to try to help enforce social distancing, AAMC did introduce this idea of having 2 testing windows per test date. So you would be able to choose either a 7:30 a.m. appointment if you're a morning person, or you could choose the 3 p.m. appointment if you like to sleep in. So there would be 2 testing windows. The idea here was to try to divide the students up into obviously smaller groups to try to help enforce that social distancing at the test center. Now, do note that the MCAT is a very long test, so it is a pretty full day. You can see here that, including all of sort of the administrative breaks and everything around the actual testing, you're probably going to spend about 7 hours and 30 minutes, at the test center. So it is a full day. There's even a lunch break included in the middle of the MCAT, a 30-minute break to eat, because it is such a long exam. So definitely be prepared for that. It's a little bit like training for a marathon and getting yourself ready for a pretty exhausting experience. Now, once you take the MCAT, you do need to wait approximately 30 days to receive your scores back. So keep in mind, there'll be a little bit of a attention-filled wait until you can see how you actually did on the tests. You'll have to wait about a month. And then AMC does have certain restrictions on how many times you can actually take the MCAT. So you can see them listed here, 3 times in 1 year, which would be a lot. I would hope that no one would want to take the MCAT more than 3 times in 1 year. Then they have the restriction of 4 times over a 2-year span. And then my personal favorite, the 7 times in a lifetime. So I really hope that no one tries the MCAT more than 7 times in their life. I think AMC introduces this for your own protection. So please do not attempt the MCAT more than 7 times. Okay, so that's the MCAT. Now, the structure of the test is listed here. Basically, I'll just provide a general overview, which is that there are 4 multiple choice sections on the MCAT. And as you can see, they're all fairly long. They're either anywhere from 90 to 95 minutes, and they'll have anywhere from 53 to 59 multiple choice questions. Okay, so the 30-minute lunch break comes after section 2, which is the critical analysis and reasoning skills. And then there are optional 10-minute breaks between the other sections, which we highly recommend that you take. Okay, now as you can see here, there are some very long section names for each of the sections of the MCAT. We can shorten them a little bit. So the first section we can sort of call the Chem Phys section, because it essentially covers your chemistry and your physics. So you'll need to know general chemistry, you'll need to know organic chemistry, you'll need to know physics, you'll need to know biochemistry. Okay. The second section is one you've probably heard of, which is the critical analysis and reasoning skills, or CARS for short. So this section is entirely reading comprehension. It's all passages about a variety of topics. So you could get a passage about art history, you could get an economics passage. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in economics or art history to do well. All the information you need is in the passage. But the passages themselves can be quite difficult, right? So this is not the lightest reading you'll ever have. So for a lot of science students, this is actually the most difficult section, because it can be really difficult to make your way through the passages and pick out what's important. Okay, third section also has a very long name. We'll just call it the bio section, because it is mostly biology and biochemistry. And then the final section, which we'll just call Psych-Soc, is where you'll find your psychology and your sociology. So you do need to have, a bit of background in that as well to do well on the MCAT. Now, each of these sections has a fairly strange scoring range, which you can see here, 118 to 132. The average is usually at around a 125. And I think most students are usually aiming, at least for Canadian medical schools, they're usually aiming for at least a 127, 128 in each section. And then overall, what happens is that they add the 4 sections together, and you get this total score range here from 472 to 528. And then the average there is usually set at around the 500. So most students are usually aiming to try to get, above a 510 to be competitive for most Canadian schools, and to be honest, a lot of international schools as well. Okay, so that should give you a sense of what kind of score you're aiming for on the MCAT. Now let's switch gears. For those of you interested in dentistry, of course, there is also the DAT. So the DAT is a bit of a unique test, only in the sense that it is one of the only standardized tests that is different in Canada versus the United States. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But it is the dental aptitude test. It is administered by the Canadian Dental Association. And you can see the website listed here, cda-adc.ca. And as I said, it is a different test in Canada versus the US. Now, it is not completely different. Basically, the core of the test is the same, but there are a few items or topics that are different. So you can see here, one of the bullet points mentions one of the ways in which the tests are different. In Canada, the DAT remains a paper-based test, whereas in the US, you take it on computer. And then the other sort of major differences are that you know, in the US, there's a few additional topics you need to be familiar with. So you would need to know organic chemistry, and you need to have some background in math, which you do not need for the Canadian version. Okay, and we're going to take a look at the Canadian version of the test in just a second in terms of its structure. Now, the Canadian test dates normally would be February and November. But when the pandemic hit, things changed. So it is no longer, you know, one test date in February, one test date in November. The Canadian Dental Association had to adapt a little bit. They actually canceled the February test date and they administered the DAT over several dates in June. And now for November, what they've done is they have, as you can see here, a range of dates from October 20th to November the 8th. And again, the idea here is to make sure you have smaller groups of students coming in to take the exam to try to maintain that social distancing. All right, now, unfortunately, the registration deadline has passed for this particular window. It was September the 8th, the deadline, but the 2022 dates, I'm sure, will be announced fairly soon. Unfortunately, Canadian Dental Association has not announced them yet. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that website here on the slide for when they do announce those dates. It'll be interesting to see if they go back to the idea of one date in February and one date in November, or if this idea of having a range of dates will continue into 2022. Okay. Now this year they did administer the test through Prometric test centers, which are actually a lot of the same test centers where the MCAT is administered. And unlike the MCAT, there aren't any real restrictions on how many times you can take the DAT. You can take it as many times as you want, but it should be noted that if you do take it more than once, the dental schools will see your most recent score. So that is the only score they will see. And then they will see how many times you've attempted the DAT. Now with the MCAT, medical schools see all of your scores. But with the DAT, the dental schools will only see the most recent score, but then they will also know, how many times you've actually attempted the test. And then here you'll have to wait approximately 3 weeks to receive your scores, unlike with the MCAT where you had to wait about a month. And I know we've got some questions in the chat, but I'm going to save those to the end and make sure I get all the information in, and then I'll try to answer all of your questions in the chat as soon as we're done. Okay. Now with the DAT, you can see here the breakdown. It's a little bit different. It is a much shorter test. It's a little bit under 3 hours without the breaks, and if you don't take the manual dexterity section. So you can see here there's a section up at the top called manual dexterity, which is an optional section. This is what you may have heard of as the carving section, where you need to carve a shape into a cylinder of chalk or soap. And these days, most dental schools do not require the manual dexterity exam. Okay, so most students don't take this particular section, and I believe for this last cycle only Laval was requiring the score for the manual dexterity test, so it's likely not something you would necessarily need to take. But of course, the other 3 sections, you will take. They are the multiple choice sections, and you can see there's the science section, which covers biology and general chemistry. And then you have the perceptual ability, which basically covers your 3-dimensional spatial awareness, very interesting section. And then you have reading comprehension, which is exactly what it sounds like, passages, and you answer multiple choice questions based on the passage. And then I do want to point out that the most challenging thing about the DAT is simply the time constraint. So please make note of how many questions you're answering and how many minutes that you're allotted. In most cases, you're actually have less than a minute per question, so you need to move very, very quickly on the DAT. All right, so it has a very different scoring range from the MCAT. The way the DAT scoring works is that you receive a score from 1 to 30 for each section. And then instead of adding them together the way you do on the MCAT, you actually get a composite score, which is the average of the scores. So you will have one final score from 1 to 30 on the DAT that is an average of how you did on all the sections. Okay, so what is a competitive DAT score? Well, that's really going to depend on the school, but I think most students are usually aiming for 19 or 20 and above in order to be competitive for some of the, some of the top schools, but other schools will have lower requirements. Totally depends a little bit on the school, but in general, we usually recommend that students are aiming for 19 or 20 at least. All right, so in terms of getting yourself ready for these tests, in terms of sort of the next step for you as a student, I always like to recommend some free events and also some practice tests. So I'll start just by talking about a practice test. And I know a lot of students are sometimes a little hesitant to do a practice test because they feel like they haven't done any studying. So they feel like it's unfair to jump in and take a full-length practice test. But I would actually argue that that is the main reason to do it. You should go in and get a baseline score for how you're performing right now on the test. And that helps you to determine how far you are from your goal, right? So if you're very far from your goal, then you know you're going to need to put in a lot of extra effort to get to that goal. But if you're fairly close to your goal, then maybe your preparation doesn't need to involve, as much effort as you initially thought. The other advantage, of course, of taking the practice test is it gives you a sense of where your strengths and weaknesses are. So you'll know which areas of the test you're going to need to work on and which areas you need to review. Okay, so for both the MCAT and the DAT, we have some practice, test dates essentially, where you can get proctored and you can take a practice test and see exactly how you performed. So for the MCAT, that's happening on Saturday, November the 6th at 9 a.m. local time. And for the DAT, that's happening Saturday, November the 27th at 10 a.m. local time. And you can see the URLs here where you can go to register for these events. And in addition to the practice tests, we're also running some symposiums where you can learn more about actually applying to medical school and applying to dental school. These symposiums will feature an overview of how to apply. They usually feature a presentation from our friends at Austrek as well about applying to international schools, but we'll talk about applying to Canadian schools. We will give you, some sample questions from each of the tests. And we will then have a panel of either med or dental students who will basically answer all of your questions about what life is like in medical school and dental school. Okay. And then finally, we have an OAT presentation as well. If you're considering optometry, you can check that out as well on Thursday, November the 18th. And then finally, for the MCAT students out there, we've got a couple of free things you might want to try out. We've got a free prep trial, which is basically an opportunity to take 2 free weeks of access to all of our biology content. And then we've got some MCAT flashcards, which are basically, an app where you can start memorizing some key terminology for the MCAT. So check that out as well. And then finally, in terms of our courses, for the MCAT, we have a program called the MCAT 510 Plus. I think the unique thing about this program is that it guarantees a particular score. We're going to guarantee that you're going to get a 510 on the MCAT or that you will improve by at least 10 points. And if we don't achieve either one of those goals for you, then you can receive a refund on the program. So we're the only company that is confident enough to put our money where our mouth is, and we believe we can get you there in one of these two goals, as long as you do what is required in the course, which is attend your classes, do your homework, and take at least 8 practice tests. Okay. And the other nice thing about this program is it's quite long. You spend 168 hours with us, so we will definitely have you ready. We give you 16 full-length practice tests. The course also comes with a satisfaction guarantee, which allows you to take the course again for free within a year. We have a team of instructors, one who specializes in each subject. So it's a very one-stop shop for getting you ready for the MCAT. And similarly with the DAT, we have a fundamentals program, which is a lovely program in the sense that it feels like a small group tutorial. You get a lot of personal attention. You will not have more than 10 students in the class. It has 30 hours of instruction, includes the Canadian Dental Association prep kit. It has the same satisfaction guarantee where you can come back within a year and take the course again for free. Okay, and then we also have a version of this program available for those of you interested in taking the American DAT. And there is my contact information again. So please make note of my email address in case you'd like to reach out and ask for a copy of the slides. I would be happy to send those off to you. So I'll just take a quick look at the chat to see what kinds of, if there were any questions. Oh, it was just Sarah. Perfect. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to pop into the chat? I think we have about a minute left. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? So the DAT Fundamentals program does not have that same score guarantee that the MCAT 510, but our DAT program for the American DAT, the DAT 20 Plus, does have that guarantee. So our fundamentals comes with the satisfaction guarantee, which is that you can come back within a year and take the course again for free. Okay. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, nothing else from me. That actually concludes our virtual fair. So thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much, Sunny, for presenting. Make sure to take down Sunny's email there. Lots of great information if you're looking to do the MCAT or the DAT, or the DAT, I guess I should say.
You can say that, it's all good.
Perfect. So thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.